All right, y'all, we made it to part 6 here of this Road to Revolution conversation. So if there's anything that you are unclear on, make sure you're asking questions. Make sure that you can respond to these two questions here as well. To what extent did the French and Indian War maintain continuity and foster change in the relationships between Great Britain and the 13 colonies? And also be able to explain the intellectual and political causes of the American Revolution. What does revolutionary society look like? This is going to be a pretty quick conversation, but I just want to go through and mention life, right? The S part of the precise chart. What is society looking like? We have these ideas of liberalism, of egalitarianism, that people should be viewed as equals, even if they're not treated as equals, that they should have a voice in their government, although there's rules about who can have a voice and who cannot. Civil rights are important. Private property, of course, is super important. Republicanism and the common good is the goal, right? This is the creation of a republic, this idea that we have representatives who help us navigate our government systems. There are merit-based positions here. We're not focused on who was born the richest, but this is part of the American ethos of, can you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make something of yourself? This is the whole idea behind the end of a meritocracy. Of course, that will come back again in more modern U.S. history, and we'll be talking about that later. More and more self-made men are participating in political leadership. It's not necessarily a brag anymore to say I was born rich and here I am. I come from an important family. But it's also a brag to say I was born poor and here I am. I don't come from an important family, and yet I made something of myself. So despite a new perception of liberalism and egalitarianism, it's also important to remember that there is a small upper class still in the colonies, and that small upper class retains its status. That they have the biggest concentration of the wealth in this sort of new American country. Women. Women write a whole lot, right? Abigail Adams is known a lot for the letters that she writes to her husband in 1776. She says, if we mean to have heroes, statesmen, and philosophers, we should have learned women. So there are lots of evidence of the Daughters of Liberty who are very involved in the American Revolution and the build-up to the American Revolution. But they are still seen as, the ladies. Even though Abigail Adams says, remember the ladies, they are very important in terms of bringing about the revolution, but they are not included in the government for a very long time, and certainly, aren't able to vote and things like that. Blacks and slaves during the Revolution, they have very limited participation in the Continental Army. Most slaves were, if they fought in the war, they were forced to fight on the side of the loyalist slave owners. And I want to just remind you guys that a lot of the slave owners on the large plantations in the South, their economy was dependent on exporting their agricultural goods to Europe, and so that was a main reason that they were loyal to the British government, and they forced their slaves to fight on the side of that. If you look on the right, you also see free states, right, and also the date when slavery is eliminated. So you'll see that these new territories that are created, many of them are created as free territories. The green are slave territories, and the blue are going to engage in gradual emancipation or gradual abolition of slavery. That Lord Dunmore's proclamation up there in 1777 or 1775 was essentially promising freedom to slaves who left their patriot masters, escaped their patriot masters, and fought on the side of the British. So those slaves there are blacks in the Americas before the Civil War who are not slaves, right? But their rights are incredibly limited, even in states that have, so-called eliminated slavery. Oh, I think I already mentioned that. Native Americans, half the population of the Native Americans in the East is going to be wiped out between 1754 and 1783. So remember, 1754 is the beginning of the 7 Years' War. And 1783 is just after the American Revolution, or at the end of the American Revolution. So that's a pretty significant population decrease. Some sided with the American colonists, but many sided with the British, hoping that the British would help them continue to sort of stave off this encroachment of American colonists, into Native American lands. All right, y'all, we made it through. I appreciate your diligence and your patience going through these notes. Let me know if you have any questions.